Hey, soldiers, two of America's biggest banks, their CEOs, they are extremely worried about what's going on in our economy. Jamie Dimon over at JP Morgan and David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, they have some deep concerns. And I want to talk to you today about what they're seeing, because we need to understand how they're thinking in order to maintain our course on the road to financial independence. This is a journey, not a destination, and we cannot afford to get knocked off of this path.
Stay on the road. And stick to the road. Oops.
All right, let's start off with David Solomon over at Goldman Sachs. He recently said that there's a good chance that we haven't quite reached the peak yet, the peak of inflation. I tend to agree with that. Think about it. The Inflation Reduction Act, the misappropriately named Inflation Reduction Act, actually will end up raising inflation because it contains all kinds of wacky provisions like an import tax on oil. So you're going to raise the price of oil. Diesel fuel is a derivative of oil, okay? So what will happen is you'll see prices to power shipping containers, or container ships rather. The price to move that across oceans is going to potentially increase. The price to put that on a train here in America and send it out to, a terminal for a truck to pick it up, that price is going to increase to power that train. And the tractor trailer also, the price to fuel that vehicle to bring you the merchandise to your local Target or Walmart, that's going to increase. Not to mention the fact that if you look at farm equipment, most of which is powered by diesel fuel, diesel engines. So you've got a farmer that's going to need to pass on that increase in fuel, and then he's going to put it on a truck that also needs to pass on that increase in fuel to you. That's going to add up to higher prices. So that is one of the reasons why I agree with David Solomon about the fact that inflation is certainly going to increase. It's not going to be reduced. Solomon goes on to say, anytime you have high inflation and go through an economic tightening, you wind up having some sort of economic slowdown. Now, when he says economic tightening, what he's referring to is Jerome Powell, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, raising interest rates. That's a form of monetary tightening. And so we've got the perfect storm because we have tightening rates or rising interest rates, okay, which is making money more expensive. We're experiencing high inflation, okay. If you just look at food inflation from July, that's up 10.9%, okay, food inflation. Now, in their headline number, they don't count food and they don't count energy, although those are the two most frequent interactions you have with the economy on a daily basis even, okay? Multiple times throughout the day, all right? And they don't count that in their headline number, but it was up 10.9%. So we've got high inflation, rising interest rates, and yes, we are in a recession. So the pressures on the consumer are They're getting pretty heavy, all right? Now, Jamie Dimon over at JP Morgan, he is usually a little bit more colorful in his analysis and outlooks on the economy. He says he sees something worse than a recession, potentially. He says that there's a 20 to 30% chance that we'll get something worse than a recession. Now, the only thing that I can think of that's actually worse than a recession is a depression. Now, if we take a look at some of the manufacturing data, we might be getting a little forecast. We might have the binoculars out and see this particular cloud forming out on the horizon. The Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, their July 2022 Manufacturing Business Outlook Survey, slipped into negative territory. But a little bit about this thing. The manufacturing activity in the region declined overall in July, according to firms responding to this month's Fed Manufacturing Business Outlook Survey. The survey's indicators for current general activity and new orders declined further into negative territory. The shipments index were positive and rose slightly, while the indexes for inventories and unfulfilled orders were negative. Now, that is kind of, concerning there, to say the least. Now, if we take a look at the Empire State Manufacturing Survey, this is done by the New York Fed, this gets even more interesting. The diffusion index for general business conditions is at a negative 31.3, and that was a decrease of 42.4 from the previous month's 11.1. So manufacturer sentiment in the Empire State, the New York area, is pretty pessimistic right now. The Empire State Manufacturing Index rates the relative level of general business conditions in New York State. A level above 0.0 indicates improving conditions. Below indicates worsening conditions. And at negative 31.3, we're deep into the negative territory below that 0.0. The reading is compiled from a survey of about 200 manufacturers in New York State. Now, let's jump on a airplane here and get over to China, and we've got some similar news coming out of China with regard to their manufacturing outlook. China factory orders shrink in an ominous sign for global outlook. Investors wanting to gauge the health of the global consumer sentiment should look no further than China's factory orders right now. Makers of goods ranging from Christmas decorations to clothing and tents say orders from overseas customers are drying up, with some predicting that the best they can aim for is flat demand versus last year, according to more than a dozen export managers interviewed by Bloomberg News. So, China is the world's manufacturer, by and large. So, what they're seeing is kind of a lagging indicator of our sentiment here in America. Demand is down here, so downstream, that causes Chinese manufacturers to experience these reductions in production. So the whole world is kind of, the biggest economies are kind of seeing the same things here that would lend credence to what Jamie Dimon and David Solomon have both said. Okay, and here recently we looked at wages in the U.S. We took a look at it in a previous video, I think yesterday. But here, have another look at the chart from the Federal Reserve data. Wages in the United States of America are down, okay? And look like they're plummeting down. We'll see. Hopefully this trend will reverse. I'm not sure if it will in the near term. But if we look across the pond at our cousins from the United Kingdom, regular pay fell at the sharpest rate on record between April and June, official figures show. Wages, when taking into account rising prices, dropped by 3% on the year, the Office for National Statistics over in Britain said. Household budgets are being hit by soaring energy bills as well as higher food and fuel costs in recent months. So the whole world is experiencing this. The rise in prices has fueled UK inflation rates 9.4%, with warnings the economy will fall into a recession. They're probably already in a recession as well. They're just lying about it like the United States government is. So we're seeing the same kinds of things go on across the world. And in large part, this has to do with energy policy. I find it very interesting that Germany has decided not to take their last 3 nuclear power plants offline. They've decided to keep them running because they are in a situation where they're heavily dependent on Russian energy, and it's just not working out too well. Now, I know here over on the East Coast, the last few days have been kind of cool, considering the fact that we're in August. So I would imagine that I'm no meteorologist, but this could portend cold temperatures for the Northern Hemisphere going into our winter. And if Germany is not able to, well, they've already been telling people to go ahead and figure out how to get some firewood. This is the largest economy in Europe, the most technologically advanced, and they're telling people to go back to the 16th century, chop firewood, when they could have built energy infrastructure of their own, but they want to outsource it. And the United States is doing something similar. So we can actually expect to see higher energy costs here in the winter throughout the Northern Hemisphere, throughout the Western world, because our politicians want to pursue this crazy green agenda at all cost. They don't have the sense to say, okay, we can develop these technologies and wean ourselves off of fossil fuels eventually. But no, they just want to cut the cord like a light switch, and you see how it's working out. Now, if we go back to Jamie Dimon and refer back to him, he's actually quoted as saying here recently, why can't we get it through our thick skulls? America boosting oil and gas production is not against climate change. But the left is trying to pursue this policy at all costs, and we have a right in this country that is pretty toothless. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon spoke to wealthy clients on a call Tuesday. This was last week. The call touched on a variety of topics, including climate change and the odds of a recession. We talked about the recession aspect of it. Jamie Dimon says we should focus on climate. The problem with that is because of high oil and gas prices, the world is turning back on their coal plants. It is dirtier, Dimon said on the client call Tuesday, per the Saturday report. Why can't we get it through our thick skulls? That if you want to solve climate change, it's not against climate for America to boost more oil and gas. So I bet you he's real popular at the cocktail parties this week after, taking a sword to the sacred cow of climate change. But I've told you before, there's no bigger environmentalist than me, but I'm also a realist. And I don't want to freeze to death in my home over the winter. So I want to be actually able to heat my home using current technologies, and then one day maybe we can move away from that to something that is more efficient and renewable. I'm not going to talk about clean because solar panels aren't necessarily clean. Where do they go when they die? What about these wind turbines? Where do they go when they die? Okay, those are considerations that we should have top of mind. But I don't want to get too deep down that rabbit hole. I do want to let you know that you should continue. I had a conversation with an individual today, and we were talking about doing what you can. He asked me, well, how much? I don't make a lot of money. How much should I be putting away? I said, every dime that you can. Every dime that you possibly can, you should be putting to work for yourself because these prices are going up. Now, I got a fireplace. I don't know about you. Buy an extra sweater. Do what you have to do. Don't expose yourself fully to these energy costs. Another thing you can do is try to lock in energy, an energy price for the long term. You can get a really good deal usually if you do that. Do your own due diligence. Talk with your local provider. Try to figure it out with some research that you can do online. But try to lock in an energy price. That way you can free up money to actually have for your asset acquisition. You got to stay on that path, guys. All right? So that is all I have for you for now. But what I want you to do is I want you to go and I want you to check out this video. Tulsi Gabbard, she says they're coming for us. And what she means by that is these new draconian tax laws that they're coming out with. They hired 87,000 new IRS agents, or they're in the process of doing so. And it's going to get kind of interesting. So we want you to be aware of what's going on. Watch that video. Understand what's coming down the pike with regard to taxation and how you can legally avoid the onerous taxation that will certainly be coming in the future of America. Guys, I'll talk to you soon.